My wife of 54 years looked me dead in the eyes and told me she loved me. That same morning, she had already transferred $340,000 out of our joint account. She thought I was just a frail old man who wouldn't notice. She was wrong.
My name is Harold. I'm 81 years old. And before I tell you what happened, I need you to understand something. I am not a bitter man. I spent 54 years being the best husband I knew how to be. I worked construction for 30 years. Got up before the sun every single morning. Came home with calluses on my hands and dirt under my fingernails. My wife, Diane, she was a schoolteacher for most of our marriage. 3rd grade. She loved those kids like they were her own. We raised 2 children together. A daughter named Carol and a son named Paul. We bought our house in 1987. Paid it off in 2004. We weren't rich. But we were solid. The kind of solid that takes decades to build. And I really thought we were going to go out together. Side by side. The way we came in. I was wrong about that too. Because here's the thing about getting old that nobody tells you. People start treating you like you're already gone. Like you're furniture. Like you're a relic from another era that just hasn't figured out its time to disappear. About 3 years ago, I started noticing little things. Diane would lower her voice on phone calls when I walked into the room. She started going to book club, twice a week instead of once. She got a second cell phone. Said it was for her sister. Her sister Dorothy passed away in 2019. I noticed. I didn't say anything yet. But I noticed. Then our son Paul came to visit one Sunday. He pulled me aside in the garage while Diane was making coffee. He sat down on an old stool and said, "Dad, I need to tell you something and I don't know how." I said, "Then just say it plain, son." He took a breath. "Mom's been seeing someone." The world didn't spin. I didn't fall apart right there. I just felt something go cold inside me. Like a light switching off in a room you thought would always be warm. Paul said he had seen them together at a restaurant in the next town over. A man named Gerald. Diane's age? Retired. Apparently they had been close in high school, more than 60 years ago. Paul said he had been going back and forth about telling me for 2 months. I told him I was glad he did. And then I told him something that surprised even him. I said, "Don't say a word to your mother." "Not yet." Here's where most men my age would have confronted their wife immediately. I understand that impulse. But I spent 30 years working construction. You don't tear down a wall before you know what's behind it. So instead, I started paying very close attention. I checked our bank statements. I had full access, always had. Diane managed the household bills, but everything was joint. What I found made my hands shake. Over the past 14 months, Diane had been making regular transfers. Small ones at first. $500 here. $800 there. Then they got bigger. $5,000 in March. $12,000 in July. $40,000 in September. By the time I sat down and added everything up, she had moved $340,000 out of our joint savings. $340,000. That was the money I had worked my whole life for. That was our retirement. Our security. The cushion we had built for whatever years we had left. And she had been draining it quietly for over a year. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time that night. The clock on the wall ticked. The house was quiet. And I made a decision. I was not going to react emotionally. I was going to be smart. Because I may be 81. But I am not gone yet. The next morning, I called my nephew Dennis. Dennis is a retired attorney. Estate law, mostly. He's in his late 50s, sharp as a tack, and he has always been straight with me. I drove to his office, didn't call from the house phone, and I laid everything out on his desk. The bank statements. Paul's account of what he had seen. The phone records I had requested from the carrier. The dates. The amounts. Dennis listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back and said, Harold, I'm glad you came to me before you did anything. He said 4 words that changed everything. You have legal options. Dennis explained a few things to me that I hadn't known. First, because the money had been moved out of a joint account without my knowledge or documented agreement, it could be considered financial misconduct in the context of a divorce proceeding. In some states, that kind of asset dissipation, the legal term for hiding or wasting marital assets, is taken very seriously by family court judges. Second, our house. Now, here's something I had never told Diane. Back in 2019, when Dorothy passed away, Diane had been so consumed with grief that she wasn't paying much attention to paperwork. Around that same time, I had done a quiet refinancing of the house to lock in a lower rate. Nothing unusual about that. But during that process, on the advice of a financial planner I had spoken with about estate planning, I had restructured the title. The house, our house, the one we'd paid off together, was now held in a trust. My trust. With specific language about what would happen to it under various circumstances. Diane had signed documents at the time. I had explained them to her in plain terms. She had nodded and not asked many questions. She had no idea what she had actually agreed to. And Dennis, when he reviewed those documents, looked up at me over his glasses and said, Harold, you may have accidentally set yourself up perfectly. I want to be clear about something. I am not a vengeful person. I did not set up that trust to trap Diane. I did it for estate planning. Normal, responsible estate planning. But life sometimes hands you something that turns out to be exactly what you needed. So Dennis and I began to build a very careful plan. Phase 1: Documentation. We needed to establish a clear record of the financial transfers, the relationship with Gerald, and the timeline. Paul helped with this. He was quiet and steady and furious in the way that only children can be when someone hurts their parent. Dennis hired a licensed private investigator, a woman named Marcia, retired law enforcement, very professional, to document what Paul had already seen firsthand. She didn't need long. Within 2 weeks, she had photographs, receipts, hotel records, the works. Phase 2: Financial protection. Dennis helped me open a new individual account at a different bank. We moved what was left in the joint account, just under $60,000, into a protected account, documented every step of the process, and notified the bank in writing of potential financial misconduct related to the joint account. We also froze certain assets through proper legal channels. This was not theft. This was protection. Dennis made sure everything was above board and documented. Phase 3: Timing. We picked a date. Now let me tell you what happened 2 weeks before the date we had chosen. Because it got worse. I came home one afternoon to find Carol, my daughter, sitting at the kitchen table with Diane. They both looked up at me with the same expression. I know that expression now. It's the expression of people who have decided something about you. Carol said, "Dad, sit down. We need to talk." I sat. Diane reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand was warm. She smelled like her perfume, the same perfume she'd worn for decades. She said, "Harold, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I've been feeling trapped for a long time. I think we want different things from whatever time we have left." She paused. "I think we should separate." I looked at her. I looked at Carol. Carol said, "Dad, this doesn't have to be ugly. Mom just wants to be able to live her life. She deserves that. She deserves that." I want you to sit with those words for a moment. 54 years. 2 children. A house we built together. A life held together by everything 2 people can give each other. And my daughter was sitting there telling me her mother deserved to leave. I said very little. I said I understood. That I needed a few days to think. Carol nodded like she had expected that. What neither of them knew was that as of that morning, I had already signed the legal documents Dennis had prepared. The papers were sitting in his office. Waiting. That night, lying in the dark, I listened to Diane breathe beside me. I thought about the girl she had been when we met. 22 years old. Laughing at something I said? dark hair, quick eyes. I thought about the night Carol was born, how Diane had gripped my hand so hard she left marks. I thought about Paul's first baseball game and how Diane had yelled so loud the other parents stared. I thought about a lot of things. And then I thought about $340,000. I thought about a man named Gerald. I thought about phone calls with the volume turned down. And I stopped feeling sad. 3 days after that kitchen table conversation, Diane asked me if I had made a decision. I said yes. I told her I thought we should sit down together with someone to talk things through. A mediator. She seemed relieved. She probably thought I was going to fold. That I would agree to whatever she wanted because I was old and tired and wouldn't know any better. She suggested her friend's husband, a local attorney named Brent, who I had never liked. I said that was fine. We scheduled it for the following Thursday. What Diane did not know was that Dennis had already sent her a certified letter, addressed to her full legal name, to our home address. I had arranged to be away that morning when it arrived. I was at Paul's house, having breakfast with my son and his family, when Diane called my cell phone. Her voice was different. Tight. Controlled. But I could hear the edge underneath it. She said, "Harold, there's a letter here from an attorney." I said, "I know." Silence. "What is this?" I said. "Diane, I think you should read it carefully." The letter outlined the following. 1. Harold James Whitmore was initiating divorce proceedings on the grounds of marital infidelity and financial misconduct. 2. Documentation of $340,000 in unauthorized transfers from the joint marital account had been compiled and would be presented to the court. 3. The family home, held in the Harold J. Whitmore Living Trust since 2019, was not subject to equal division under standard marital property law, as it had been restructured prior to the current proceedings and the terms of the trust had been clearly established and signed. 4. A motion had been filed to have Diane's access to any remaining joint financial assets suspended pending a court hearing. 5. Any contact with Gerald Mast, his full name, regarding the relocation of assets or property during the proceedings would be documented and presented as evidence of continued financial misconduct. Diane went very quiet. Then she said, "Harold, you don't want to do this." I said, "I already did it, Diane." She said, "The house," I said, "is in my trust. Dennis says the language is very clear." Another silence. Then something I didn't expect. She started to cry. Real tears, I think. And part of me, the part that loved her for 54 years, ached hearing it. But I thought about $340,000. And I stayed steady. Carol called me that same afternoon. She was not warm this time. She told me I was being cruel. That I was punishing her mother. That this was not who I was. I let her finish. Then I said, "Carol, your mother took $340,000 from our savings without telling me. While she was seeing another man. While I was in this house believing we were still partners." Silence. I said, "You sat at my kitchen table and told me your mother deserved to live her life. I agree with you. But I deserve something too. And what I deserve is not to be lied to and robbed by the woman I spent my life with." Carol didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said quietly, "I didn't know about the money." I said, "I know you didn't." Paul was the opposite. He showed up at the house that evening with a bag of groceries and made us dinner. We sat at the table together, just the two of us, and ate in comfortable silence. At some point he said, "You okay, Dad?" I said, "I will be." He nodded. He said, "You did the right thing." I said, "I know." Now here's the part that I think surprised everyone. Including Dennis. During the discovery process, that's the legal phase where both sides have to share financial documents, Gerald's name came up in a very specific context. It turned out that $210,000 of that $340,000 Diane had transferred hadn't just sat somewhere. She had given it to Gerald. Gerald, it emerged, had a small business. A rental property operation. He had been having financial trouble. and Diane had been quietly funding him. Which meant that Gerald, a man I had never met, who had come into my wife's life and taken her away from everything we had built, was sitting on $210,000 of my money. And because that money had been transferred fraudulently, without my knowledge or consent, from a joint marital account, Dennis said we had grounds to pursue Gerald directly. Not just Diane. Gerald. When Gerald's attorney received that notice, the rental property business had a very bad week. Gerald ended up having to liquidate assets to make it right. He didn't have the cash on hand. He had to sell one of his rental properties. Fast. At a loss. I want to tell you something about the moment I found out. I was sitting in Dennis's office when he told me. And for the first time since all of this started, I smiled. Not because I wanted Gerald to suffer. That's not who I am. But because the truth had followed the money. And the money had led us right to him. The divorce settled 9 months after I filed. Here is what the final agreement looked like. Diane received her personal property. Her clothing, her furniture, her personal jewelry, her vehicle, her teacher's pension, which was entirely hers, earned over 28 years of work. She received half of our remaining joint savings, which at that point was roughly $30,000. Half of what was left. The house remained in my trust. Dennis's argument held up completely. The judge reviewed the trust documents, the signatures, the timeline, and ruled that it was established as a separate instrument prior to proceedings. The $210,000 that had gone to Gerald was treated as a marital asset. Unlawfully dissipated. The court factored it into the final settlement, which significantly reduced what Diane was entitled to claim from other assets. All told, justice landed where it was supposed to. Not perfectly. Life doesn't work in perfect circles. But close enough. Diane moved into a smaller apartment about 40 minutes away. Carol told me they talk regularly. Carol and I are still working things out. She feels guilt about that kitchen table conversation. I don't need her to feel guilty forever. But I do need her to understand what her mother did to me. That conversation is ongoing. Paul and his wife have dinner with me every Sunday. Those Sundays have become something I look forward to more than I can explain. I want to tell you one more thing about Gerald. Because I think it matters. About 6 months after the settlement, I was at the hardware store in town. Looking for a new faucet fitting for the kitchen sink. Basic plumbing, nothing major. I turned around the end of an aisle, and he was standing there. Gerald. A tall man. Gray hair. Nice jacket. He looked like someone who had lived a comfortable life. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. He knew who I was. There was no question about that. We stood there in the plumbing aisle for maybe 3 seconds. And then Gerald said, "I'm sorry." Just like that. Plain. No excuses. I looked at him for a moment. And I said, "I know you are." And I walked away. I don't carry it with me. Not Gerald, not the money, not the years I spent trusting a woman who had stopped trusting me. It happened. It's done. I still live in my house. The one I paid off in 2004. The one in my trust. The one with the kitchen table where I had breakfast this morning. Just me and the clock on the wall and the sunlight coming through the window over the sink. If you are older and you are watching this, I want you to hear me. Your age is not a weakness. Let people think it is. Let them underestimate you. Let them believe that time has made you soft, slow, easy to handle. And then be thorough. Be calm. Be precise. I am 81 years old. I cannot run. My knees are not what they were. I take 3 medications every morning. I need reading glasses for almost everything. But I know how to think. I know how to wait. I know how to walk into an attorney's office and lay out the facts and say, "Now, what are my options?" That is not weakness. That is 81 years of learning how to survive. And if you are younger and you are watching this, maybe because this kind of story speaks to something you're going through, I want to tell you something too. Document everything. Know what you own and how you own it. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Don't react until you understand. And never, ever, assume that someone is too old, too tired, or too far gone to figure out what you did. The clock is still ticking in my kitchen. The house is quiet. And I am still here.